Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. I am Abe with MysticGenMara.com, a small town mystic from the middle of Idaho. And tonight I wanted to do a book review of a book that I just recently finished called Sanctuary: The Path to Consciousness. And it started off when I first found this book, I was like, oh, well, it's a fictional book on energetic healing. This sounds fun. So that's the reason I picked it up, and it's from Hay House. And so I started reading it, and it fell into this pattern within the book of this person was having some physical issues, went to this alternative therapist, and he's like, it's not physical. Let's look at the energy that your system is producing. And so they would look at the energy patterns, basically the aura or your bioetheric field, and they would start to work through a pattern. It started off in the first part of the book where they would give you a charged vial of water that you would drink at certain times, like dropperfuls and stuff like that. And it was interesting because as you go through the book, you're not just reading a fun book, you're reading about someone who has actually is developing, I guess you could say, a new way of thinking of illness. And it's referenced throughout the whole thing. The main doctor character of the story is like, I'm not here to cure your disease. I don't really care about your disease. I'm looking at the energy patterns. I'm looking at your family history. I'm looking at the different social contagions energetically, not medically, obviously. And so what they were doing is they were working at a vibrational level to realign the energy field of your physical body. And as your energy field aligned itself, you actually would resolve physical ailments. Which, if you've ever read anything by Louise Hay, that's kind of what her affirmations and the mirror work that she talks about a lot is talking about, is you're realigning and you're readjusting your way of thinking because that affects your physical body in a really serious way, honestly. And throughout this book, the main doctor character is like, I don't care, I don't cure disease, that's not my thing. I am looking at energy patterns. And he emphasizes this continuously. And entering the other main character class, there's a whole bunch of them, is this gentleman who went to the main doctor. Let me see if I can find their names because I can't remember. So the doctor's name is Max Stevens. And Max is the one who's like, I have a medical degree, but I'm a researcher and I'm looking at energy fields. I don't really care about your illness. He does, but that's not his goal. And he one of his students, or one of his patients, I should say. Why can I not find this guy's name? And maybe anyway. One of his patients has this friend named Jane. Jane is diagnosed with a terminal form of cancer, and the doctors are pretty much like, you have an expiration date of 6 months. Bye. Chemo's not working. Too bad. Go away. And I mean, that's being very flippant, and I'm not playing down people who have cancer, but that's kind of how the Jane character in this book felt, was they just don't care. So why am I going back to them? And so she was really bummed out. She didn't want to go through another round of chemo because she'd already been through a lot. And it was like every time they make a promise, it didn't go through. So she was really struggling with this. So that's how she ends up, and maybe it's Steven is his name. Anyway. And it might be written from his viewpoint, and that's why you never see his name. Anyway, so Jane is telling her friend this. Terry is another lady that's involved. And Terry goes to this, we'll call him Steven because I can't remember his name, and is like, do you think this Dr. Max would be able to help Jane? And he's all, I don't know. We could always find out. So they talk to Max, and Max is like, nope, can't help her. And he's all, well, can we just do some tests on her? And what it boiled down to, Max couldn't help her until she was willing, and this is an emphasis throughout this book, you can't help somebody unless they are willing to be helped. It's not a matter of, oh, I'm going to do this for this other person and they don't know. The type of therapy that Max had discovered and developed wouldn't work because you're dealing with things at an energetic, a consciousness level. So you're not just working in the conscious world, the alpha, the beta brain. You're digging into the theta, the delta, the even further back to names I can't even think of right now. And you're pulling all of that information forward to make it conscious. Because what happens when you bring something like that into the conscious mind? It disappears. Because when you bring secreted or subconscious patterns into a conscious setting, most of the time they unravel. They can't be supported in the conscious world. And so he keeps going through how this Dr. Max has developed this work, and Jane finally gives up and is like, fine, you can take me to Max, we'll go through the process. And instead of going to an office in a city, Max moved his entire practice in a few years to a place out in the middle of the desert, but it was an oasis, so that was cool. And the way they described it, I don't know, to me I had this image of like the Shangri-La style Eastern entrances, and it probably wasn't like how they described it, but that's what the image in my head was as I was reading through it. And so Terry, Jane, and Stephen, because I can't remember his name, they go to this place out in the desert, and it's called Sanctuary, or what's the other name for it? I think it's Sanctuary. It might be the temple. Anyway, I should have put better notes down. So they go out here to this place, and she finally goes and sees Max. She's literally got one foot in the grave type of a thing, because Jane is just dying. And so he tests her, and he gives her, the bottles of the empowered water, says go through this process. You'll be meeting with me or his direct assistant every single day for so many weeks type of a thing. And after she leaves, Max tells Stephen, his friend, dude, she's barely alive. You couldn't have gotten her here sooner. And he's like, she finally gave up and said, well, try this. She didn't even want to come. And basically the way Max's therapy works through this entire book is, if your life force, the spark that keeps you going, your stardust energy or flame of God, however you view that, if that gets too far weakened where the imbalance is stronger than your life force, then what Max doesn't work for you anymore. And that was where Jane was on that precipice where she was almost to the point where there was no hope. Which, the premise of the book is there's always hope, but there are cases where the person themselves has given up completely, and then that's when the hope goes away. Because if the person can't find that spark, can't develop that hope, then there's no point. It doesn't matter what practice you do, it doesn't matter. If that person's not willing to fight for it, it's done. And I've actually seen that play out with people that I've known over the years with various illnesses. They just reach a point where they just give up, and from the time they give up to their untimely leaving is generally really short, 30 to 40 days most of the time from the give up period to, and that's what Max talks about in that section is, if you're not willing to step up, if you're not willing to fight to live, then there's nothing that anyone can do. And it doesn't matter if you're a medical doctor, an energy healer, or fill in the blank. If you're not willing to fight, there's nothing. And that's kind of his point. Going through the rest of it, and I will give a little bit of a spoiler, I'm not going to go into full details, but Jane actually recovers. But it's not from what you would think. she doesn't get healed physically. She has her energies balanced through this process. And as these energies become more balanced, stabilize, and basically start to run in a better, more perfected way. It's like when you, I don't know if anyone still does this, but when you used to defrag your hard drive because it would get too cluttered, and it would made your computer run more efficiently afterwards. This is what was happening within her system, is it was taking out the clutter, it was realigning things. Through this process, she came to know herself very, very deeply. And oddly enough, through this work, Stephen and Terry and eventually Jane became willing assistants to the group of medical people that Max had acquired. And at one point in the book, they said there was over 60 medical and research people who had come to Sanctuary to learn what Max was doing, and it was fascinating them. Eventually, they get to a point where they can start to work with a photograph of the person, and they don't even have to see the photograph. They just need the photograph at present to make it work. And it was interesting because as this is going on, Max develops this entire computer system based off of energy frequencies. And he says in there, I don't deal with the disease, I deal with the frequency. And if a person has, let's say, tuberculosis, there is a frequency of tuberculosis. That doesn't mean they have the disease. That means they carry a frequency that would align with the disease called tuberculosis. And so it's funny because Stephen, Terry and Jane's friend, Max's basically the link, he is told that he has the frequency of tuberculosis. He's like, I'm not sick. And Max is like, no kidding. Most people carry it because it was at one point a huge contagion. The human energy field, the human body, has developed certain barriers to it, but what that did was it triggered the response. So there's always this layer in the field of tuberculosis. It doesn't mean you're sick, it just means that there is this energy field within your system. And he describes it basically as a lot of these energy frequencies that we carry are there as protectors against outside forces. So it keeps the other triggering events out. But go through as you're going through the book, and it's not that long. It's only about 210 pages, something like that. It's really short. And it took me a while, to be honest with you, to read this entire book. It took me like 5 months. Not because it was a hard read, and not because it's a long read. It took me, just because of the interest that I was having with it, is they're describing what you see if you work energy work, or if you're working with energy fields. You'll start to notice patterns in people who have different illnesses. You'll start to notice as you work with people the different ways and the different emotions that start to pop up. Like I said with Louise Hay, that was something that she was extremely tuned into. And that's how she wrote her first book, and most of her books since were all tied to this, that most of your physical issues come from a subconscious state, something that you've repressed, an energy frequency from an emotional issue. And what these guys do in this book is they take those emotional issues and shift it into an energy frequency exclusively. They don't work with the energy of love, or the concept, the emotion of love. They work with the energy field of love. They don't work with the emotional state of anger. They work with the energy field of anger. And to some people, that's a distinction without a difference. But the way he describes the separation is actually fascinating. It's like when you're looking at a brain scan. To him, there's all this information there. To someone else, it's, oh, their heart's beating rapidly, so they must be feeling, a love state or a fear state. And he's like, no, they're feeling this state and this state and this state. These energy frequencies is what's happening. So as you scan through the book, you get to the ending of it, and the ending was a little different than what I expected, because even though what they talk about is theoretical in the book, what you find out by the end of the book is there's actually a group of people who are working towards developing the exact system that he talks about in this book. If you work with energy of any form, Reiki, chakras, acupressure, acupuncture, any of that, I recommend this just because it gives you a different viewpoint of what you're doing. He uses computers to adjust the energy frequency, where we would use our hands, needles, thumbs if you do acupressure, or your consciousness if you're doing distance work. And that's what he has figured out works with the computer. Obviously, eventually we're not going to need computers because the energy field of the human body is surprisingly powerful, and he does talk a little bit about that and the fact that the computer right now is a tool, but eventually we won't need that tool anymore. And like I said, it's a really interesting book. I highly recommend it, especially if you do energy work of any form. Even if you're doing therapy and counseling and you don't do energy work, tell you a secret, you're still doing energy work, because working through emotions is working through an energetic field. Just saying. But check this book out. It is really interesting. Again, I'm probably not doing it full justice because it's just the way it's written is really fascinating to me. The link is in the description. There's the paperback and the Kindle, just in case you wanted to go paperless. But yeah, definitely check it out. It's a really fun book, and let me know if you have read it already. Let me know in the comments section, and if you haven't read it yet and you choose to read it from watching this, let me know what your thoughts are when you finish, because like I said, to me it was really fascinating to see what you work with in the energy field, and you start to see it, you start to sense it better as you work with clients. And in here he's talking about it from a completely well, not completely, but a more clinical aspect. And so it's interesting to see the two different dynamics from personal experience versus the way they present it in the clinical sense. So if you enjoyed this video, please drop a like on it. Like I said, let me know your thoughts. If you've read the book, let me know. If you haven't yet, and then you do after you watch this, let me know what you think about it. If you enjoy this type of content, please subscribe. I really do appreciate it. Otherwise, I will see you in the next video or live stream, and I hope you have an awesome day.